This TikToker is very upset about being called sir in public despite having a full beard. Let's hear Caesar out, I guess.
So I got served today at the pharmacy, and I'm not saying men can't look like this because please go off, kings. But like, I'm not doing damage to masculinity. I think y'all are when you serve me, when you call me a man, right? Like, I'm not a man. Don't consider me for the pool of men. And maybe the people who are like, oh, masculinity's in decline, well, stop thinking I'm doing anything with it. I'm not part of that equation. Count me out.
So maybe I'm just a cynic or just heartless or just not a nice guy, but I find myself unable to have even an ounce of sympathy for someone who goes out in public with a full beard, a male who goes out in public with a full beard, and then is upset at being called sir. What did you expect? I see that this person has breast implants, so they're sending mixed messages, but maybe they didn't take a look at your body. They just saw your male face with a full beard and called you sir. To me, that is not a hate crime. That is not an outrage. That is not even a mistake. Now, if you said, please don't call me sir, I think a service person should be polite and maybe just call you something else or avoid the issue. But to go out with this expectation or this entitlement that you can walk through the world fully appearing, at least shoulders up, as a male and as a man, and then not be called sir or viewed to be a man, just strikes me as totally unreasonable. And the whole thing, this obsession with how you're perceived by others or validated or not validated by others, is incredibly narcissistic. I mean, I support all day this person's right to dress however they please, to look, mix and match the different gender associations of the things about how they present themselves. It's a free country. Do what you will, but you can't do these things and then act like you're victimized when people make completely understandable assumptions about you. Now, in fairness, this person didn't really freak out the way that many of the TikTokers do upon being misgendered, but they do seem perplexed or confused by it as if it's some sort of mystery or like doesn't make sense. It actually makes perfect sense. 99.99% of people just use pronouns that correspond with their biological sex. And in the cases where people don't, you're going to have to ask for that and hope that people choose to accommodate it, or at least present very, if you're wanting to be called ma'am or she or her, you're going to have to at least make some effort to present that way for any everyday person to even consider calling you that. And if you make no such effort whatsoever, or in fact, as you appear to do, seem to actively attempt to mix and match parts of both genders to make yourself unclear or ambiguous, although I don't really think it was successful, but because I do think this person is unambiguously male appearing. But if that's what you're going to do, you can't then complain when people still call you sir. I mean, they're just being polite. They're just doing their job. So there's not much to get up in arms here about from the perspective of this individual. And just more broadly, I'm really sick of seeing these videos on TikTok and other places on the internet where people aren't called what they like to be called, and then they come on the internet and complain about it. Like, don't you have any real problems? Don't you have actual things going wrong? If this is the biggest problem in your day today, you must have a pretty good life, is all I'll say. Like, you actually, to speak of privilege, as people on the left love to do, you actually must be pretty privileged if that's like an issue for you or something you feel the need to vent about or seek feedback about, because it's not that big a deal what some random person who's serving you somewhere calls you sir or ma'am or whatever. I mean, if I called someone on the phone and they referred to me as ma'am, for example, because say my voice sounded high on the phone or whatever, I wouldn't care. I'd just be like, yeah, sure. And if I felt some need to correct them because I was ordering like men's clothes or something where it was relevant, I would probably do so. But regardless, like some random person's word choice doesn't really meaningfully affect me. And that's where I think a lot of the pronoun people just kind of go astray, is that they need to focus on having a sense of self that's strong enough to not constantly be needing external validation and not need to be desperate for the rest of the world to validate you. Like if you're actually confident in your own sense of self, You don't need that. You don't really care. As long as people aren't actively harming you, their opinions are not super relevant to you. But when you care so much about what other people say and what other people think, right down to minute word choice like this, it actually isn't a great sign from your own perspective. And I have to say that people who are intentionally gender confusing, going out into the world and then making unreasonable demands of people is not a good look for the LGBT community or for actual transsexual people who want to blend in and want to just be accepted and be left alone. In fact, it's kind of the opposite. It's the kind of thing that strikes a lot of people as unreasonable, and then they associate it with the whole LGBT community. And it's a small piece of everything that I think is bringing down this movement and this community, though it's not really a community. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below, and do hit that like button, because this one did try my patience a little bit. It really did. Today, this TikToker went on a wild rant about why football is actually evil. Yeah, seriously. Take a listen.
This is your reminder that football is evil. It's evil propaganda. Where are the men in our society right now? What are they all doing? It's almost like somebody wants to collectively keep them all dissociating and escaping into imaginary playland for almost half the year. Imagine if football wasn't on. Imagine if it wasn't on every TV everywhere you go. Imagine if men didn't just dominate the social spaces without even questioning it for a second. Hey, it's kind of weird that all my interests are put on display here. Do you think that's on purpose? That's calculated. They want you to sit right down on the bar stool and watch the game. Yeah. And then you think, oh, I love the game. Football. Fuck the media and TV and that shit in general. If we're all busy watching TV, we will not get ourselves out of this. We cannot help each other as Americans. We don't even have a culture to save if our culture is this. It is not culture. It is an absence of. We have to face reality and look at each other in the eyes and discuss what's happening. And stop ignoring what's the true nature of our reality.
Babe, put down the crack pipe. You've had enough. I mean, just yikes. This take is absolutely unhinged. But you kind of knew that was coming, because remember, anytime you see that bull-looking ass nose ring, 98% chance you're about to hear the worst take of your life. Anyway, babe, it's just not that deep. Football is not evil. It is literally just entertainment. It is just something to entertain people and give them something to cheer for and root for. And if it wasn't football, it would just be something else. It would be TV shows or musicians or another sport or something else. It's not some grand scheme to keep the masses placated so they don't engage and rise up in your communist revolution or whatever. It's just entertainment. It's existed in different forms in every society always. It's a natural thing that humans need and want, and there's really nothing wrong with it in a general broad sense. I'm not a huge football guy, but the idea it's evil is just laughable and absurd. But she apparently also thinks that it's not just evil, but racist, because in the comments she added, when somebody wrote every form of entertainment is an imaginary playland, she wrote yes, and some of it is waving military flags and selling you white nationalism. Babe, excuse me? The irony of accusing the NFL of promoting white nationalism when they do racial justice activism and protests and stuff, and when it's actually, if anything, the opposite. It is a common interest that unites men of many different races, where they're cheering for teams that are incredibly racially diverse and all working together towards a common goal. It is actually on net probably a profoundly racially unifying force in America, football and our collective enjoyment of the sport and everything. The idea that it's promoting white nationalism is just preposterous. And I love how she acts like it's so sinister that they would try to entice people into sports bars by playing football or whatever. Like, babe, it's just a business trying to attract customers. It's really not that deep. And essentially whatever she's saying could be applied to any other form of entertainment, right? It could be applied to the Kardashians or whatever, but you don't see her going after that because there is a weird thing about woke people just trying to police things that men like. And I think some of them need to just give it up, give it a rest, and get off their high horse. That's the problem, fundamentally, with a lot of this woke stuff. They are anti-fun. They are joy-killing. They seem determined to just suck the fun out of life, destroy humor, problematize basic forms of entertainment, and just get in the way and muck up things that people enjoy. Newsflash, babe, that is not a way to attract people to your side. It is a way to repulse them and make them want nothing to do with you or the ideas you're selling. And because I think the ideas that people like this are selling are crazy and bad for our country, I actually want to say, keep it up. Keep up the good work. You're doing amazing, sweetie. What do you guys think? Have you ever heard this take before, or is it just this chick on TikTok? Let me know in the comments below, and do hit that like button to reward my suffering through this bizarre video. Today, this TikToker explains why she finds it hard to trust white people. Let's take a listen to her interesting perspective.
Here's another reason why I struggle to trust white people.
Oh?
I was at Home Depot today, and, you know, I had an associate glazing the at me, like they do. It happens to us all the time. So I took the opportunity of her proximity to just ask her for help because I didn't know where everything was. And she looks at me and she goes, well, why are you buying all this stuff? It's the landlord's responsibility to fix things in a rental. Ma'am, what did you say? And because I know that some of you are going to attempt to explain to me what she really meant, here's my question for you. Why didn't she first assume that I might be the landlord? Do you know what I'm saying? Why is her first assumption that I am the renter? Do you know what I mean? And I was so pissed off, but I don't have the privilege of being pissed off. I did have the satisfaction of saying, well, I'm a homeowner, so there's only one person who's going to be able to do it, and watching her shrivel up. But, you know, I just paid for my shit and I walked out. And it's these little microaggressions, right, that build up over time where you can't quite prove the racism because other white people are going to attempt to gaslight you and explain it away. But it is racism. And that is why I take it on a case-by-case basis. And I don't want to hear y'all say I'm sorry and that sucks and I apologize on behalf of white people. I don't care. I'm just letting you know that, once again, this is an example of why I think the way I think.
So there's a lot to unpack here, which, by the way, guys, if you haven't noticed, that's what I say after I hear something kind of batshit. First, I mean, who really knows if this story is true? But just for argument's sake, let's assume that it is. Is this a racist incident or a microaggression? First off, well, microaggression is not a real concept, but is this a racist incident? Was this person maybe making a racist comment? Maybe, but I guess I'd say it's hard to say. She also could have just misunderstood something you said and thought that you mentioned having an apartment, or thought that something you said gave her the impression that you were a renter rather than a homeowner or a landlord. So without actually knowing the specifics of what was said, it's kind of hard to say. It's also possible she just looked at a black person and said, and just mentally assumed you weren't a landlord or you weren't wealthy enough to own a home, which I do think would be unfair. That'd be kind of stereotyping. That'd be a not a good thing to do, right? It would be definitely a little bit racially discriminatory. So if that was the case, I would say that's something she should maybe reflect on and try to avoid doing in the future. Although it's also not the end of the world, okay? It's really not. So hard to say on that one, whether this is truly an instance of racism or just maybe some confusion. But I do think it's safe to say that either way, it's not exactly an earth-shattering event, a victimizing or traumatizing incident in any real sense. If anything, it actually sounds like she was the service person at Home Depot was the one who ended up feeling more embarrassed, and maybe rightfully so, hard to say, again, without more of the facts. But what I did want to touch on is the absolutely unhinged discourse and blanket discrimination that folks like this throw around on TikTok. This is why I don't trust white people. Excuse me, ma'am? Because you had one bad interaction with one white person that you potentially misunderstood, but even if it was a genuinely bad interaction, you then say that's why you don't trust white people categorically. Babe, there's a word for that. It's called stereotyping. It's called discrimination. It's called racism. Imagine a person was mugged by a black person one time in New York City. And then they went around saying, and that's why I don't trust black people. We would all look at that person and be like, excuse me? First, we'd be sympathetic. We'd be like, oh, that's terrible. You were mugged. Then be like, and that's why I don't trust black people. We'd be like, oh, that's not fair. That's racist. That's discriminatory. You can't hold the actions of one individual against an entire group of people. Oh, wait, apparently you can, as long as that group is white people and as long as you're on the woke hellscape of TikTok. It's really shocking stuff. It's really vile stuff, honestly. It's hateful, it's bigoted, and it's divisive. And it's so wild to me that this kind of content gets lapped up by the seals on TikTok just clapping. And so many of them are actually woke white people who are like, so sorry, queen. Oh my God. And it's like, dude, she just racially insulted your entire demographic and you're now sucking up to her. Get a spine. It's a little pathetic for sure. And I do always just go back to one point about the TikTok stuff. TikTok regularly takes down my videos for various violations of community guidelines or hate speech, but you can literally just be openly racist against white people as much as you want, and she'll never get it taken down for hate speech or anything like that. The double standards are galling. I mean, if TikTok didn't have double standards, they wouldn't have any standards at all. Also, I just have to talk about this concept of microaggressions, which I find to be totally illegitimate. It is so infantilizing to members of a different minority group to suggest that minor verbal tics are somehow harmful to them. Actually, most people have pretty thick skin and would just roll with something like this and just point out, actually, no, I'm the homeowner. And then they say, oh, great. Okay, here's the stuff you need. They move on with their day. They wouldn't go to TikTok whining about it. They wouldn't go to microaggression. They wouldn't put it on a list to read to their therapist of all the microaggressions they've endured that week, because that's not the mark of a mentally stable adult. That's the mark of somebody who's incredibly mentally and emotionally fragile, which, unlike you potentially, I do not believe is the case for most members of minority groups. I actually think most of them are pretty darn resilient and would never think to deign themselves victims over something like this, let alone go whine about it to an audience of thousands and thousands of people on TikTok seeking sympathy. Just generally speaking, guys, we've got to get away from this collectivizing way of viewing the world, whether it's taking the actions of one immigrant or one black person and then drawing conclusions about entire demographics, or therefore holding it against other people who belong to those groups, or doing the same thing to white people. In any and all cases, that is a morally bankrupt approach to the world. It is a perspective that strips people of their individuality and holds things against them they have no control over. And it's deeply unfair and wrong, and it only serves to further inflame and divide our society. But other than that, you're doing amazing, sweetie. What did you guys think of this wild anti-white TikTok? Let me know in the comments below, and do hit that like button to reward my suffering, because this one definitely took a couple brain cells and just incinerated them. Today, this TikToker is chastising us that we better wear a mask, even outside and even in 2024.
Please wear a mask. It's not that big an ask. Please wear a mask. I am literally begging you.
Let me think about it. No. I have sympathy for people with crippling levels of paranoia and fear, or people with rare autoimmune conditions or who are otherwise immunocompromised. I absolutely do. But I am not going to stop living my life. I'm not going to cover up my face and make myself have trouble breathing and not be able to see other people's expressions and deprive myself of a basic element of the human experience because of that. I'm not. And this person seems to be suggesting that people wear masks outside, as they are doing in this video. That is totally unscientific. COVID does not spread very much in outdoor open air environments. Even the experts that people like to cite, who have gotten a lot wrong on this issue, still didn't recommend mask wearing outdoors, even years ago while the pandemic was still going strong. People like this really do seem to have fallen victim to some sort of cult. Now, this individual put out a response video after getting a lot of feedback from people that, nope, we're not doing this. And that response video was quite something.
This video implies it. Unfortunately, due to health reasons, we have to make sacrifices. We can't cater to every need and disability. You see, that's where you're f***ing wrong, my guy! You're so fucking wrong. Capitalism has taught you that we can't meet everybody's needs and we're not supposed to think about anybody but our fucking selves, but we can make spaces accessible for every fucking buddy. And in a couple of years, you're gonna see how disabling this event was, because all you assholes who don't wear masks and just keep getting that infection over and over and over are going to develop severe health conditions. This is a mass disabling event. And when you are disabled, you are gonna wish that places would think about you. It's not that fucking hard. It really fucking isn't. And like, I'm no stranger to going viral and having just the worst of humanity in my fucking comments, but y'all are really showing out with how fucking idiotic your thought process is. Get outside of your fucking self, fucking remove yourself from this bullshit capitalism, hyper individualism, where you don't give a shit about other fucking people. You don't give a shit about disabled fucking people, which is such a large part of the population. I don't know why you don't care about disabled people, but you really fucking should.
So, there's a lot here. There's a lot. I will say, I think this person deserves our sympathy, not our ridicule. This person is clearly not well on multiple levels, and I actually have compassion for them. I think they have been brainwashed and propagandized by fear porn and hysteria, and that's the only way one would end up in such an unreasonable and hysterical place. There are so many things wrong with this argument, but I guess to start, what is this idea that we are all going to become disabled from COVID? That is made up. That is not scientific. That is not rooted in actual evidence. And two, wearing a mask doesn't mean you won't get COVID. We all wore masks all the time, and we still all got COVID like 5 times. So this idea that this is a pananka that people are just choosing not to use isn't true, babe. It's not true. And it's not that we don't care about disabled people, but we're just not going to compromise our own living our lives to an unreasonable degree for extremely rare exceptions and edge cases. If I know I'm going somewhere where a person is immunocompromised, maybe I would be willing to wear a mask, but I'm not just going to start covering my face at all times in public and struggling to breathe in case I might bump into somebody with some sort of immune condition. That's not reasonable. And that doesn't mean I don't care about disabled people. They are able to get a mask and wear it whenever they want, as much as they need to do, and they are able to take a COVID vaccine that's available and they believe it will protect them. That's their right, and they are totally able, and I support their ability to do so. But ultimately, babe, at some point, your health is your responsibility, not mine. And what any of this has to do with capitalism is honestly beyond me. People having an individualistic approach to the world is not unique to capitalism. That is just fundamental human nature, and it expresses itself in different ways in all economic and political systems. Capitalism is just the one that harnesses that towards productive ends most efficiently, right? It makes your selfishness, in order to pursue your own best interest and enrichment, you've got to go provide some value to society in many cases, right? Build a company, sell a product a lot of people want, work hard, do these kinds of things. So it has nothing to do with capitalism. Even in a non-capitalist society, people still think about their own self-interest. You are detached from the reality of human nature, and it shows. And I just have to spare a word for this very style of TikTok commentary where you're just screaming at us and cussing. You know that doesn't make you more correct, right? You know that doesn't make your arguments stronger, doesn't mean you're in the right just because you put on this vibe of moral indignation. You still have to actually convince us. And just dropping F-bombs all over the place and making my job harder when I'm editing this podcast and have to bleep them out, that doesn't actually convince anyone or make us more likely to come around to your point of view. If anything, it kind of does a little bit of the opposite. It makes us a little defensive, like, whoa, you're screaming at me there, babe. So maybe just stop. Stop doing these unhinged car rants with F-bombs where you're yelling at people about how wrong everything they do is, And maybe if you want to convince us to do something, actually try to convince us. Don't just cuss us out and tell us we're evil. Or you can keep doing that, but we're going to keep ignoring you and not doing what you want. Sorry. What do you guys think? Have you encountered anyone who's still terrified and paranoid like this in the real world? Or is it just people on TikTok acting like this in 2024? Let me know in the comments, and do hit that like button while you're at it. Today, this wild TikTok claims that capitalism is just modern day slavery. Buckle up and get ready to lose some brain cells with me as we take a listen.
This is slavery. They just let us watch TV when we're done with our day's work. This is slavery. We just have the choice of Pizza Hut and Taco Bell and Burger King. This is slavery times 2. Not only do they make a majority of the money off of your labor, you go and spend your slavery bucks and they make double on the products that you buy. A car loan, a loan for your college education, a loan for your home. This is slavery, you guys. They got people slaving so hard they're developing mental health problems, and guess who gets the profit when those people seek help? Not us. It's slavery. It's slavery, but the white people are in the house. They're close to the massa. The rest of us are out in the field.
Oh?
And don't get it wrong, some of them come out of the house and go out into the fields, and some of them in the fields go into the house. Everyone's always banging so hard for capitalism, but it's just slavery, you guys. It's just slavery.
I'm usually really not one to even use this word or to bring up this point, but I feel like in this case, I just kind of have to. How is this not offensive to actual victims of slavery, which is still a practice in parts of the world and is such a horrifying and terrible thing? How is this not offensive and insulting to compare the life of a free working person in one of the most prosperous societies in human history to that of a slave who was brutalized and forced to labor in disgusting and horrific conditions and given no freedom and no liberty and have their rights violated in too many ways to count? How is that not like in a society that gets offended over jokes, how is unironically making those kinds of assertions and absurd comparisons not actually offensive? That's what I don't understand. The double standard here between policing jokes, but then people can actually say in seriousness, and no, I checked, this is not a parody account or a bot. This can be said in seriousness and it's somehow not considered worthy of offense. I would consider it profoundly offensive if I was the descendant of slaves, or if I had been a survivor of modern day slavery, to compare my plight or my ancestors' plight to that of the modern day laborer who works from home and eats Taco Bell. Like, babe, seriously? I mean, the whole thing is so unhinged. Capitalism and just working for a living is not in any way, shape, or form similar to slavery. Because by definition, slavery, you're not paid, you're not compensated, your labor is forced, and you don't get to choose where you work. You can't quit your job as a slave. You can't put in your 2 weeks notice as a slave, babe. It is absurd. It's such an offensive comparison, an outrageous comparison, because it's literally the antithesis of slavery, where you have free will and you can decide what to do, what kind of work, where to work, how to structure your life. All of this is up to you, and it's up to you to pave your way in life and shape your life for yourself. This is literally the opposite of slavery. And I mean, the idea that like, oh, well, now you use your slave bucks, which that's an oxymoron, babe. There is no money given to slaves. That's kind of the point, to just buy Taco Bell and we're supposed to be happy with that. I think a lot of slaves would have loved to have some Taco Bell and to be able to watch TV. Like, the comparison here is so galling. The luxury, the relative luxury of modern day life, even for the poorest Americans, compared to the standard of living of even the rich people back then, let alone the actual slaves and the brutally victimized people back then, it's giving incredibly out of touch. And who is this they that this person keeps referring to? Well, they get to get rich because then you need mental health care and then you go see you mean that's just other people who are working, who own a business, or who are therapists or are counselors. Like, the they is all of us. We all make money and profit from the things that other people need, and we work in that field to provide that need. And I don't even understand what the alternative here is supposed to be compared to this apparently dystopian slave-like state where you're expected to pay for yourself as an adult. pay for your food, pay for your housing, pay for your own car. I mean, what? Is everything you need and want in life supposed to just be provided to you for free? Where's it going to come from? Who's going to pay for it? Who's going to labor and toil to provide it for you for free? And wouldn't those people actually have to be slaves? Like, it doesn't make sense. And why are you so profoundly entitled, yet also so profoundly self-victimizing? It's a really stunning combination. And this isn't just some fringe TikToker, guys. You actually see this idea, this argument that wage labor is akin to slavery, echoed by some of the most prominent intellectuals on the left, the Noam Chomskys of the world. And I've always just found it so absurd, and so obviously it doesn't pass the sniff test. And it's just so directly contradicted by the daily lives and experiences of millions of people in this free country who get to choose what they do for a living, choose where they work, can quit their job, get paid. It's just totally different. And it's always struck me as a really outrageous and ridiculous comparison. But none of that's to say that the plight of the modern day worker isn't hard, isn't tough, or that people aren't struggling to get by. And I acknowledge all of that, but there's many reasons for it. And a lot of them aren't really related to capitalism and are instead often able to be traced back to failures of our government and its interventions and meddling in our system and in our society. So it's not to say everything's perfect and wonderful and miraculous in our modern world for any worker or laborer. Of course not. But much of that is not the fault of capitalism, and none of it is in any way comparable to slavery. What do you guys think? Do you agree with me that this TikTok is as unhinged as it seems to me? Let me know in the comments, and do hit that like button to reward my suffering through the depths of stupidity that is this clock app.